Welcome to the NHST's governing body meeting in public. So it is an in public meeting and it's being recorded for purposes of putting it on web, so it's got wider accessibility. Please, if possible, keep your phones on silent. A blurry background or NHS background, if possible, if you're a member of the governing body. Please stay on mute if you can, because otherwise it's very difficult from a point of view of feedback to everybody. And raise your hands either virtually or in reality if you want to indicate you want to speak. And I'll just go through everybody in the order I have people on screen in order to introduce folks for the web and for public members. I see we've got Nick Marco at the moment. I think we're scheduled to have somebody else from the public online as well, but I'll just go through everybody that I can see on my participants list in a second, in the order that I have them. If you just bear with me, just need to expand my list. Okay, so in the order that I have people visible, if you'd like to introduce yourself and say your role. So I've got Ali Johnson.
Hello, my name is Alistair Johnston. I'm a GP in Ingleby and Thornaby. I'm one of the non-exec members of the governing body.
Hi, next I'm Balazar Posmic. Everybody calls me Pos. I'm the clinical chair of the governing body. And moving on to James Nevison.
Hi, I'm a GP in Darlington and an executive member of the governing body.
Okay, and then TV CCG Corp Gov.
Hello, I'm Claire Atty. I'm the corporate secretary. I'm minuting the meeting today.
Okay, and Nick Marco.
Hiya, I'm Nick Marco. I'm the local democracy reporter based at the Hartlepool Mail.
Hi, Karen Hawkins, and I see Karen's got your apologies for 3 p.m.
Hi, I'm Karen Hawkins. I'm the Director of Commissioning for Primary and Community Care for the CCG.
Yeah, and Janet Walker.
Hi, I'm Dr. Janet Walker and I'm Medical Director of the CCG.
Okay. Craig Blair.
Hi, I'm Craig Blair, Director of Commissioning. I lead on the in-hospital portfolio for the CCG. Thank you.
Joe Bushnell.
Hello, Joe Bushnell. I'm a clinical pharmacist. I work in 2 GP practices, one in Stockton and one in Darlington, and I'm a non-executive member of the governing body.
Mark Pickering.
Hi, Mark Pickering, Chief Finance Officer for the CCG.
Michelle Thompson.
Hello, I'm Michelle Thompson and I'm the lay member for patient and public involvement for Tees Valley CCG.
Caroline Gitcham.
Hello, hi, I'm Caroline Gitcham and I'm a lay member on the governing body and I also chair the primary care committee.
Jackie Keane.
Hello, I'm Jackie Keane and I'm head of governance for the CCG.
Jean Golightly.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Jean Golightly. I'm Exec Director of Nursing and Quality for the CCG. Thank you.
David Emerton.
Hello, I'm David Emerton. I'm Secondary Care Doctor on the governing body of the CCG, which is a non-executive role. Thank you.
Karen Dales.
Hi, I'm Karen Dales. I'm a lay member and audit committee chair.
Andy.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Andy Mackay. I'm the independent member for the CCG and I chair the quality committee.
Hassan Tahir.
Hi, Hassan Tahir. I'm a GP at Marshall and Billingham and I'm one of the non-executive members.
Okay, thanks. 732408.
Yes, apologies. My name is Stuart Arnold. I'm one of the BBC's local democracy reporters on Teesside.
Hi. And sorry, apologies, I just need to scroll down the list a little bit further. Spring P49. Hello, you're on mute, Spring P49.
Hi, Pos. I think that's Penny Spring from Darlington Public
Ah,
Health.
right, I did think so, yeah.
Hello,
Right.
sorry, I'm here now.
That's okay.
I was having difficulty with my getting on, so I'm here
Yeah,
now
that's okay.
and representing the Tees Valley DPHs.
Directors of Public Health for the public. Members.
Sorry, thank you.
Sorry. Okay, thank you very much. So apologies, we've received apologies from Deb Gallagher, our Chief Officer, who's unfortunately feeling unwell today. Mark Adams, the Director of Public Health for Middlesbrough, but we've got representation from Public Health. And Alex Sinclair is unable to join us for this section of the meeting. And as noted previously, Karen's going to need to leave at 3 o'clock. I haven't been notified of any other business. Does anybody want to flag any other business that they want to raise? This, no, can't see anything. No, okay. Declarations of interest. We've attached declarations of interest with the pack. Anybody want to raise any other declarations of interest in relation to matters that we're going to be discussing that haven't already been noted? No, can't see anything there. Okay. Unconfirmed minutes. If we go through the minutes, so in the pack that you've received, page 8, which is after all the declarations of interest, first one. So, oh, sorry, page 7 rather. I've got the right one. No, I've got the in-committee pack. Apologies, folks.
Page 8, Pos.
Sorry, yeah, page 8, yeah. I caught myself out again. Right, so starting on page 8 for going through the pack. Okay, page 8, page 9, page 10, page 11, page 12, page 13, page 14, page 15, page 16, page 17, page 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. Everybody okay with those as a true and accurate record of our previous meeting? Yep, I've got a hand up from Craig.
Apologies, Pos, I couldn't find the hand up button quick enough, but on page 15, there's reference to a transition investment fund. That should be the transformation investment fund.
Right. Right, okay, noted. Okay, Craig, everybody else okay with that as a true record? Okay, so we'll take that as a true and accurate record. And we've got one action, and that's complete, and that was in relation to quality and safeguarding. Anybody else got any other matters arising at all? No, okay. We'll move on to my report. So, well, the biggest, hugest thing since our last governing body meeting has obviously been the rise of the Omicron variant and the impact that's had on our patients and on the services that we provide to the patients. And as we all know, the numbers of people infected have been far higher than in previous waves. Very fortunately, the higher numbers have been offset by the fact that a lot of the population have had protection offered by the COVID-19 vaccinations, particularly those people who've had the third dose, the booster dose. And consequently, fortunately, the numbers of patients needing hospitalization, despite being high, have been manageable by the system. And crucially, the numbers of people needing critical care has not been as high as had been feared at the start of this wave. But the sheer number of people infected and the significant numbers of people needing to isolate has, particularly in this wave, had an impact on staffing in all areas of health and social care. And this has produced significant problems from the point of view of delivery of services and care to patients. That's me speaking for the health and social care sector. That's also evidently been an issue in relation to the wider sector services out in the public. But obviously our meeting is focusing on health care and the social care that we work with very closely. However, it is worth, I think, taking the opportunity to thank everybody who's played their part in the pandemic response. And that's both providers and also the public, because particularly the public who have had their vaccinations, taken the opportunity to get their booster, people who've worn their face coverings, people who've practiced social distancing, people who've used lateral flow testing prior to socializing, people who've I know people have tended to avoid the larger gatherings. Some people have avoided the smaller family gatherings over the festive period. And all of this has helped to prevent the current situation from being significantly more challenging. And obviously it goes without saying, and I'm sure I'm speaking for all of the governing body, that we are all very appreciative of all the people who've continued to provide all types of care of all types, health and social care during this particular surge. So moving on, governing body working, one of the areas of cover if there's anything of note, we've heard that the clinical commissioning group's term of activity has been extended for 3 months until the end of June 2022. So therefore preparations are being put in place to extend the periods in office for the CCG's governing body members. Stakeholder liaison met with the chair of the South Tees patient and public groups, joint patient public groups, to continue the discussion of particularly how the patient voice is going to be heard in the developing integrated care structures. And we recently had a council members meeting of our member practices. We were mindful of the fact that we potentially would be impacting on practices delivery of clinical services. So we made this very much a shorter meeting, and only if practices joined the meeting if they felt that they wanted to. However, we had a vast majority of practices did dial in, and we took the opportunity to discuss, briefly flag to them that the CCG would be around for 3 months longer, but particularly to brief them on COVID-19 vaccination updates, and gave practices an opportunity to highlight any issues that they felt were of particular importance. And all of this is covered in more detail in the papers in the Chief Officer's update. On that, I'll wrap up. Any comments or queries or questions on my report? No, okay, right. Moving on to the Chief Officer's report. Mark, I don't know if you want to come in on any of this in Dave's absence. I've got a message from Dave in relation to what he was going to be flagging as basically some of the areas that I've covered, particularly he was going to flag that the CCG staff employment guarantee has been extended, and that recruitment for the Integrated Care Board executives and non-executives is continuing as per the original timescales, and he'll be bringing a paper to the next governing body, which is scheduled for March, with further information. Mark, anything else that you want to add at all?
I think you've mentioned, Cov, the system pressures and the COVID response earlier in your report. There's mention in Dave's report about the fantastic response in terms of the vaccination effort. He's highlighted his chance to visit the North Tees Hospital and the work that was done there, and also referred to the council and members meeting that you mentioned earlier. So just to highlight those couple of things.
Okay, thank you very much. Any questions or comments on the Chief Officer's report? No? Okay. Moving on, Council of Members update. Oh, this is a third mention of the Council of Members. I don't think I'll just go into any more detail. There's details in the Chief Officer's report. Janet may want to pick up some matters in what she highlighted to the council members in the locality update, so I won't go on. I'll just pass on to Janet in the locality update.
Thanks, Pos. And again, I'll try not to repeat things that have been said already, but some of it's a little bit unavoidable. It's not surprisingly, since our last meeting, obviously it's been exceptionally busy within primary care, and my exec GP colleagues and other GP colleagues have all fed back to me the significant workforce pressures that they have been experiencing, as we've touched on already, and that applies to anybody obviously working in the health and social care system, with the impact of staff isolating and being unwell themselves with the virus. It was obviously exceptionally transmissible. However, the pressures are now improving, but the challenges do still remain significant, because obviously with any small business with a small number of staff involved, if you do have an issue, then yes, it can have a more significant impact. However, our practices are all working together as groups of practices coming together under a primary care network, and they are sharing their business continuity plans and working together where it is possible for them to do so, to obviously be as resilient as they are able to. But understandably, with the Omicron variant and everything all happening at once, it was a little bit of a perfect storm, as obviously many other health providers also experienced. However, things do appear to be, she says, tempting fate, but hopefully not. Things seem to be getting a little bit easier now, and hopefully that will continue to be the case as long as we all continue to take the appropriate steps that we are required to. Our practices were experiencing, and one thing we did pick up at the Clinical Council of Members was some of the complexities that practices had experienced with regard to access to lateral flow testing and PCR testing, but very, very grateful to our partners for their support in enabling us to keep elements of primary care functioning through the access to PCR and lateral flow testing from other agencies, which was gratefully accepted and received. Certainly, we've mentioned the Herculean effort with regard to vaccinations, and I'll come on to that later on in today's agenda with the vaccination board update. Pos. However, just to flag that understandably during the big push with vaccination, with the knowledge that the third dose was more effective against the Omicron variant, reducing the risk of severe disease, there was a need for us to sort of clinically prioritise work within primary care, obviously, which yes, does potentially have impact, but I have to say that seems to have, that balance was achieved in primary care to make sure that we could pursue the vaccination approaches, but manage to provide the essential services that obviously were required to continue in general practice. We do still continue under level 4 EPRR, which is a state of readiness for the NHS perspective, to make sure that we are all having a central working together, recognising that the system is still undergoing and living through the pandemic, and we need to sort of be driven appropriately, which does mean that from a clinical lead perspective, working within the CCG, we do need to make sure that they are patient facing and or delivering the COVID vaccination programme. But obviously as a CCG, we are being appropriately mindful of that and using clinical input where we need to. From a COVID oximetry point of view, that continued to be in place across all the localities of the Tees Valley during the Omicron major peaks and continues to be in place now to monitor those patients at highest risk. And that complements nicely and provides additional support to those patients who are in the particular vulnerable category that we have incorporated into the COVID medicines approaches, which is a national approach to offer intravenous medication and or oral antiviral medication to those patients at highest risk of COVID that are identified in an eligible population, and coordinate those approaches that have come in place across all of England from December. And that we enable the oximetry programme to run alongside that to make sure that those at highest risk do receive the monitoring that will hopefully give them the best outcome from COVID's perspective. And plus, to be fair, they were the main messages, but very happy to take any particular questions or comments.
Okay, any questions or comments? I think it's probably worth reiterating how the impact of staffing this time has really hit smaller organizations, and our member practices count more as the smaller organizations within our structures. So it is particularly striking how this particular surge has taken a toll on the ability to deliver the full gamut of services that practices have delivered, but not just practices, but also our smaller community providers. And also, interestingly, talking to trust chairs recently, how it's also impacting on areas within our big organizations that have got smaller departments within them that are very sort of small team, but very specialist levels of services that are hard to cover. So hats off from myself to all the teams that have managed to deliver the services that they have done within the constraints that they've had to face. Joe, you've got your hand up.
Yes, it was only to share, I think, our thanks to innumerable staff who have cancelled holidays and come in when the workforce has been severely affected. And you know, a wonderful example in the week after New Year in one of my practices where we had no cleaners to come in, and the practice next door cleaning team volunteered and came in for 3 nights after they'd finished their shift in their first practice and cleaned our practice between the hours of 9 p.m. and midnight. And that sort of dedication is, I'm sure there are thousands of examples, and it is humbling and marvelous that nearly 2 years into the pandemic, people are still prepared to do that.
Absolutely, that's a fantastic example. Thank you, Joe. Jean, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Pos. I would just, I think, follow on from Joe with that, because it's large and small, isn't it? Yes, the specialists, and in some cases, people have worked in very different ways. So in earlier stages of the pandemic, for example, when there weren't many children, relatively, to how much there would normally be, the paediatricians were lining up to take turns with the proning of patients in ITU. So I think we see that large and small examples from across the system. And I would agree that the best word, Joe, is humbling. It's very impressive, but it's also humbling because everybody is stepping forward to how can we, what do we do, how can we help? We can do this. And I think that that's still happening now is a testament to the true spirit, whereby patients are put first by everybody, not just those who actually touch the patients, but those who were involved in supporting services to deliver to patients. Thank you.
Okay, so noting all of the superb service and care provided by all of our colleagues in health and social care. Any other comments or things to note before we move on to the patient and public involvement update from Michelle? Okay, over to you, Michelle.
Okay, thank you, Pos, and apologies that this is a verbal update. At the time of trying to write my report, there was so many of my community contacts were off ill or meetings were cancelled. So I'm hoping that what I do have for you proves useful. So I'll start with the Northern CCG Joint Committee, of which I'm a lay member on there, a non-voting lay member. I always find these really interesting because it gives me a bigger view of the region and what's happening in other areas as well as in the Tees Valley. The last two meetings have mainly consisted of development sessions regarding the integrated care system and working to improve health and social care for all. The main thing is that there's a consistent communication and engagement that is key as we move forward into the new way of working across the region. The Integrated Care Board will consist of 25 voting members, 13 execs, 12 non-execs and 2 non-voting participant members, which include a representative from VON, the voluntary sector organisation, and who are working jointly with their equivalent in North Cumbria, and also a representative from Health Watch as well. One of the non-execs will have a portfolio aligned to patient and public involvement, and I'm glad to see that a communication and engagement draft strategy is being developed at the moment. The integrated care board decision makers need to ensure that they're doing the best they can for all the population across the region, and it should complement the place-based working. So the last meeting, it was really good to see Sam Allen, who is the new chief executive of the ICS, and her focus is very much on the voluntary sector and the patient voice, which I was really pleased to see it. I got that assurance that hopefully moving forward things are going to be very heavily focused on how the voluntary sector and that patient voice is heard at that ICB level. Also, the Tees Esk and Weir Valley Community Transformation Strategy, there's been meetings happening across the whole of the Tees Valley, one in each locality, bringing key stakeholders together, looking at the principles of community mental health transformation, such as the aim of the programme. There's 2 videos that I don't think they've been released yet, but they're for internal and external use. Which explains what the transformation is hopefully going to look like. In those meetings, it's what do we want to change, the co-production, how do we know that what service users want. Also covering the Tees Valley Health Watch report, which they spoke to 900 people across the Tees Valley about what they want, how that community, that help in the community, that support in the community, what that looks like. They've also looked at the existing engagement and outreach work in the Tees Valley, and they're also looking very heavily at a service user forum, including people with lived experience, because they've been through that, you know, sort of walking my shoes sort of experience. And also more important, well, not more importantly than lived experience, but what is equally important is that implementation of the strategy. So rather than just talking about what it's going to look like, what it actually looks like moving forward, and also the resources that are allocated to that. There's also been meetings with the County Durham and Darlington Foundation Trust Patient Experience team. So I'm pleased to hear that the meeting with Health Watch County Durham and Health Watch Darlington, as well as setting up quarterly patient experience network meetings, which will they're inviting key stakeholders such as care groups and their non-execs, as well as other patient groups and voluntary sector groups, to discuss and help expand and improve their patient and public involvement agenda. So that's been good to see. With our Darlington Community Council, Hartlepool and Stockton Health Ambassadors and South Tees Community Champions, there's already an update in the Patient and Public Engagement Report, which is to follow. So you'll be able to read what examples patients within those groups have been involved with, and also the other patient groups as well. And hopefully for me, it's how all of that is going to come together moving forward, and how we're still going to have those patient voices feeding into commissioning. With the local Health Watch updates across the patch, there's a lot of things that they're looking at. One of the main things has been dentistry, because there's been huge frustration from many local people when trying to access an NHS dentist. And this has been felt across the North East and North Cumbria. So all of the health watches have shared a survey in each of their localities, and it was produced and promoted within all of the networks that they have. And a script was also agreed to follow when ringing a sample of dentists in each area to get a snapshot of the situation from their perspective. And this intelligence at the moment is being analysed to inform individual local reports, but then this will also feed up to a regional report to then give to the NHS England. And they've also worked with the North of England Commissioning Support Unit to produce a number of key messages and myth busters that have been shared with the public. And it's also good to see that in the last couple of days that there's been 50 million funding allocated to help NHS dental care. So hopefully this will secure 350,000 extra NHS dental appointments until the end of March. And the children and people with learning disabilities, autism or severe mental health problems will be prioritised. And I think there's about 8.5 million which has been allocated to the North East and Yorkshire. But it's still a long way to go before people start to see a big difference with dentistry. So, you know, we've got people that are pulling their own teeth out, or people that have had no choice but to spend £1,600 on dental treatment, whereas on the NHS it would normally cost £80. So there's a lot of problems still out there, but hopefully this is a step in the right direction. The health watches are also looking at accessible information and just highlighting the impact of reasonable adjustments that the accessible information standards can give in relation to GP access in South Tees and also in Darlington. They're looking at sensory impairments experience when accessing online and remote health and care services. One of the other main topics is vaccination access, the boosters, why people are not taking up the boosters when they've already had vaccinations. So it's just looking at the whole attitude and experience. It's Health Watch Darlington, they're doing a 360 report which examines people's first experiences of the COVID when it first hit, then the vaccinations, and now accessing boosters and vaccine hesitancy and the effect of vaccine requirements for care staff. Another one is always access to GP services, just people's experiences. So all of these things are being monitored across the Tees Valley by all of the health watches. Maternity services, that was following on from experiences in Darlington, so that is still being monitored. Hospital waiting times, people reporting delays in treatment and care. Hospital discharge, the new guidance has been produced for people leaving hospital, so Health Watch are keeping an eye on what that means for patients in the area. Homelessness and refugees is another one, looking at the experience of people who are homeless or who are refugees when trying to access health and care support during COVID-19 restrictions. And then long COVID as well, concerns that people who are experiencing ongoing issues do not have their support needs met. And just the last couple of things, for Health Watch South Tees, they have launched their Health Watch Star Awards, which is their awards of recognition. That was launched at the beginning of January, and nominations for awards close on the 28th of February, and an awards ceremony will be held on the 6th of April. And then lastly, just people are starting to worry about the prescription charges. So a possible rule change this April could see millions of people in England charged for prescriptions they currently get for free. So basically over 60s get free prescriptions at present, and it's proposed that in future free prescriptions are only available to those over 66. But the changes it doesn't change the exemptions for those with specific medical needs, but the news is worrying to people who are already worried about the impact of energy prices rising, never mind anything else. So that's one that people have been talking about as well. So that is about the end of my update. So any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Okay, thank you, Michelle. Anybody, any questions, comments or queries? Karen, you've got your hands up.
Thanks, Pod. It was mainly just a comment, and obviously there's lots of work happening with Healthwatch across all of our areas, and we'll work with just a commitment that we will continue to work with our Healthwatch teams to make sure that the intelligence that we're being provided can help inform some of our commissioning decisions and changes that we make to our pathways. But just to reassure committee, obviously from a governing body perspective, all of the work that's been undertaken in relation to post-COVID, which was previously referred to as long COVID, dental and GP access are being addressed, working with our partners, so working with NHS England, working with our local authority colleagues and our voluntary sector and Healthwatch teams as well. So we'll continue to do that as we move forward, and it was just to reassure you of that was in train.
Yeah, that's really good to know, Karen. Thank you.
Thank you. And presumably the 3-month extension to COVID, sorry, not to COVID, to the CCG existence will allow us to sort of embed the methods of engagement and information passing up via patient and public involvement folks into the new ICB structure.
I think there's one thing to mention as well is that I know that the to declare an interest, I am the CEO for Healthwatch Darlington, and I know that the Health Watches across the North East and North Cumbria have been working closely together to look at ways in which that patient voice from a place-based and then a regional based can then feed up to the integrated care board, and they're also having conversations with the voluntary sector as well at that level. So it's good that there has been that extension because it just gives a little bit more time to get it right.
Michelle, Janet, you got your hand up?
Yeah, just to follow on really well from what Karen said, that yes, I certainly will be, as will the vaccine team, be eagerly awaiting the output of the information from Darlington around the vaccination programme, because any evidence that we can gather that influences and changes how we deliver our programmes to try and increase uptake, for this vaccine programme and others, obviously is really, really valuable. So Michelle, I'll eagerly await that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, anybody else, questions, queries, comments? No? Okay, so moving on to linked item that Michelle alluded to, patient and public engagement report. Who's going to be speaking to that one?
That's me, Paz.
Okay, Jackie.
Thank you. First of all, an apology to the governing body and anybody watching the video. The papers included actually an old report on this item. So what Paz has asked me to do is share on the screen the current report, and we will of course make sure that the current report is circulated and will be uploaded to the website. So if you could just bear with me while I attempt something technical, which isn't my forte, but bear with me. It says host disabled participant screen sharing.
Oh, Claire, can you just enable?
Yeah, I'll enable you, Jackie, just a second.
If this is the only glitch we have, that's very, very minor.
Right, if you try it now.
Lovely. Okay,
That's working.
Great, lovely. Okay, so I won't go through the whole report. You will all receive it, but it's just to pick out some highlights which I've highlighted on screen as well, so you can see where I am. So basically, the report, as you know, does provide an update on the patient and public engagement activities, and we do make reference within this to the comms and engagement strategy as well. So some work that has been undertaken, which has been quite significant, is reviewing the website's Get Involved section. This was an area that was highlighted as a possible area for improvement in the previous year's annual assessment on our patient and public engagement work. So Jake Graham's done quite a lot of work on that, and hopefully it has improved now and makes it easier to navigate and to also to be able to evidence some of the CCG's responses, the we did bit to the you said. So hopefully that is helpful. If anybody gets a chance to have a look at that, then do let us have your feedback. And if you see anything that could be further improved, let us know. As part of that, we've also included some information about how people can get involved in clinical research as well as part of the clinical research network. That wasn't something we previously included, but we thought it might prove helpful for members of the public. And of course, as a CCG, we do have a duty to promote research and innovation. Moving on in terms of our collaboration with other agencies, we've started to join a multi-agency sensory joint plan group in Hartlepool, as well as some additional groups across Cumbria and the North East, so we can better understand people who need some additional support or have got long-term health conditions such as sight and hearing loss. Obviously, any work that we or any insight that we get into that from the work will be applied to all of the work that we do, and any engagement and any communications activities that we take as well. So hopefully that should be really enlightening for us. There's been collaboration with parent carer forums in the region in terms of the Special Educational Need and Disabilities SEND programme, and that's included on our website as well. I won't go through, as I say, I won't go through all of these. In terms of engagement and involvement through the commissioning activities, we're working at the moment with commissioning colleagues on the Tees-wide Adult Hearing Services Review, and working with some of our community partners and Health Watch to look at the questionnaire and how best we get that and get a good reach out into our community as well. And that will be shared digitally, as well as paper versions available for people to complete and return, so that we can use the feedback to help us as we're looking at our services. Michelle's touched on some of the work that has been done in terms of the 3 groups that we commission. That is Catalyst, who covers Stockton and Hartlepool, and you'll see in the report when you receive it some of a brief outline of the work they've been doing. The Darlington Community Council, that does some work together with Health Watch. It's a separate arm to them, and the work there, as well as South Tees work, has been included there. And you can see on some of these how we're trying to link into some of the more seldom heard groups. Public campaigns that people will be aware of. Obviously, we've been promoting vaccinations. A video has been produced promoting Gizmo Primary Care Hospital redevelopment, and Craig Blair, our Director of Commissioning, and our CCG Estates and Digital Lead, Graham Earl, are included in that video, so it's certainly worth a watch. We've been promoting the patient. We've heard a few times in recent governing body meetings. We recognise public's anxiety about how difficult it can be sometimes to get into general practice or dentists or whatever, and we're doing our best to respond to that, but equally, obviously, staff within the service do deserve a level of respect, so it is just about promoting that and helping. Blood donation, there had been a drop in blood donors, and we've tried to promote that. And I know from first hand, because I gave blood on Sunday, talking to the team in there, they were saying that there's a definite increase in people coming forward to give blood since the Christmas break. So we're continuing to try and promote that too. Health Watch, again, Michelle has covered the areas being covered by Health Watch, and you'll see in there that we do refer to the Tees Escan Weir Valley's Community Transformation Report that Michelle covered as well. Equality and Diversity Inclusion Update is included in that, but there's more on that and the Governance Assurance Report later on in the agenda, so I won't go through that here. So once again, apologies for that, and we will make sure that's rectified. So happy to take any queries.
Lovely, thanks, Jackie, and we'll be sending a copy of that out to the governing body and so putting it on the website, presumably as a sort of tweaking of our governing body pack for this meeting. Yeah. Okay, any questions or comments on that one, folks? No, thanks. So we'll consider that and receive that. Oh, sorry, Craig, I just spotted your hand.
Yeah, thanks, Paz. It was just to say that we'll be looking to step up the comms and engagement work around the opening of Gisborough Hospital. We're expecting the hospital to go live from the 28th of February. Slightly delayed because of the impact of Storm Arwen on the site. There was a little bit of storm damage that's had to be put right. But we do expect the hospital to be open and delivering services from the 28th of February, which is great news.
Okay, lovely. Useful community resource there. Okay, thank you very much, Craig. Thank you very much for the report. We received that, considered it, and we'll move on to Modern Slavery Act statement. Over to you, Jean, for that.
Thank you, Paz. This just represents a refresh, which is actually around about making sure that the dates are compliant. And it talks about, it is a statement, but it's a demonstration of our commitment, both as an organisation, but also in terms of our safeguarding responsibilities. So it's largely for information, but does actually require approval. Thank you.
Okay, so that's all in the pack. There's nothing really specific, dramatically changed. So everybody happy to, we've been informed, everybody happy to receive that? Yep, nods around the table, around the screen, so to speak. So that's approved. Before we go into our next 10-minute break, there was a little quick note from one of our public attendees, if we could email out a copy of that amended report, Jackie. So if you could email, if necessary, your contact details to the CCG, Corporate Governance Office, they'll send out a copy of the amended report. Okay, thank you very much. We'll take a break and we'll rejoin, I think probably we'll make it 3 o'clock, so we're back on time. Okay, thanks. I think that's a vast majority mark of everybody who's going to be on with cameras, so you might as well get rolling with the finance report. Over to you.
Okay, thank you. So the report covers the period up to the end of November, so that's about 8 months of the financial year. As a reminder, at the last meeting we considered the financial plan for the second half of this financial year, which was an element of the temporary financial regime that we're in, part of the response to COVID. As part of that regime, we are able to claim some financial top-ups for certain areas as and where costs are incurred. And the CCG position that we're forecasting includes some assumptions around the levels of those top-ups. In particular, those that are associated with the hospital discharge programme, just over £4 million for that. And for the additional roles reimbursement scheme in primary care, so just around about £2 million for that. And for the elective recovery fund, so that's enabling to go further, faster with elective activity of around about £2 million. We have assumed levels of top up for previous months, and I'm pleased to say that for the first half of the year, so for the first 6 months, we've received all of those top ups that we anticipated, so that's positive news. Up to now, we've had no indication that any of our claims are being scrutinised or under any concern, and therefore it's a relatively low risk assumption that we will receive those top-up areas. Once those are received, the CCG will be forecasting a surplus as at the end of month 8 of just over £350,000. So very small, quite tight position against our overall turnover. As part of that, the CCG had an efficiency plan for the year that was forecasted around about £7 million, and we're currently expecting to perform to that and deliver those savings. The overall ICP position, so that's position across Tees Valley, remains in line with the plan, so that's positive in it's delivering a small surplus figure. As we move into month 9, we've been asked by NHS England to have a good look at our forecast with an attempt to try and stop any great movement between the month 9 position and the final year position. So as part of that exercise, as we were looking through December, we noted some lower levels of growth in prescribing, a little less in continuing healthcare, and some slippage on some reserves. So it's likely that we'll post a larger surplus as we move through December and through the rest of the financial year. The positive message is that that will be retained for use within the ICB as opposed to it being lost to any sort of national position. What we will do across the remaining months of the year is to keep the position for ourselves and the other partners within Tees Valley under review. So we have flexibility, and we're looking at areas such as the Better Care Fund, discharge processes and discharge support, just to make sure that we're making best use of all of these resources over the coming months, with a view to, as I say, probably posting a slightly larger surplus than the plan, with a view to being that being retained within the ICB going forward. So I think it's a positive picture at this stage of the year, and we'll try to make sure that the forecast position doesn't move too much in line with NHS requirements between now and 31st of March. But happy to take any questions on that, Pos.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Any questions or comments? No hands up yet. So we note the report, note the low risk of the funding that you described not appearing, and note that the funding will be kept under review through H2 in view of up-to-date information as to costs and expenditure that you haven't yet seen sight of. Okay, everybody happy with that? Yeah, okay, thank you very much, Mark. Moving on, Craig, to the performance and recovery update.
Cheers, Pos. Thank you very much. I won't take you through the report line by line, but I'll provide some highlights and then happy to take any questions. If we could just start with the recovery section of the report then. So key highlights probably based around infection rates and where we were at pre-Christmas. The report does reference the 19th of December as being the latest position. Obviously, we've moved on considerably since then, and rates did actually peak at over 4,000 per 100,000 head of population during the early January period. We're now seeing rates start to decline again significantly, but they are still ahead of the point at which the report was produced. So we're looking at rates between 1,400 and 1,600 for Tees Valley local authorities. That is a significant week-on-week reduction from where they were, but still higher than the pre-Christmas position. In terms of the impact of that, that's actually translated into a direct link to staff sickness across all the services that we're working with as well. So linking back to yours and Dave's updates earlier on, and some of the other information shared by colleagues, we have seen significant sickness rates within some of the provider organisations, peaking at around 20% with the ambulance service. Again, as community infections have declined, we've seen that sickness reduced to near normal levels, but some organisations still experiencing higher levels than they would have anticipated during this period of the year traditionally. That's also playing out in terms of the amount of COVID in hospital as well. And again, we've already touched on some of this, but there are considerable numbers of patients in hospital with COVID, but not to the degree of illness that we'd seen previously with earlier variants as well. So what that does mean is that there is less pressure on critical care units, which is a really positive thing. And we're also finding that many individuals are in hospital with incidental COVID. So they've got COVID, but that's not necessarily the primary reason why they are in hospital. So a positive sign, or positive signs of recovery, but clearly still major issues off the back of the Omicron strain at this point in time. Probably worth highlighting at the moment the vaccination position, and again the report is slightly out of date with the pace of change in terms of how things are moving forward. Conscious that that Dr. Janet Walker's got an update on the agenda later on, so I wasn't really going to go through that in any detail at this stage, unless you wanted to bring Janet in now, Pos. I'm not sure what your preference would be.
I think we'll let Janet talk to it properly when it comes to her section, if that's okay, Janet.
Brilliant. Spot on. Okay, so I'll move on then. Just in terms of activity and where we're at with that, great progress being made by all of our acute trusts in terms of trying to recover the elective waiting times position and deliver against some of the requirements around reducing the longest waiters. So in terms of 104 weeks, we've seen significant progress by both County Durham and Darlington and South Tees Trust in reducing the number of patients that have waited 104 weeks for an elective procedure. So much so at South Tees that they're actually ahead of the expected trajectory position based on the current week's information. That's a real positive. Spinal work in particular, some complex spinal surgeries, they've been able to make excellent progress with that. And it may be that we could, before the end of the year, get to a position where South Tees might be able to offer some support to other specialist units, which would be great. Didn't mention North Tees and Hartlepool Foundation Trust there because they don't have any 104-week waiters, so they're already ahead of that requirement and working towards reducing the number of over 52-week waits that they've got as well. So again, that's really positive. There's some additional work being undertaken now across the whole of the ICS, the Integrated Care System in the North East and North Cumbria, to look at how can we best offer mutual aid and additional capacity to those hospitals or those specialties where there are still long waits or outstanding surgeries that are due. And that's moving on at pace with all of our independent sector providers looking to provide support there and additional capacity where it's available. And that's more recently been backed up by a change to the contracting arrangements around the independent sector, with a new national contract being rolled out, which just makes it a little bit easier to access some of that capacity when we need it. All of this work's also been underpinned by the continued implementation of extremist plans that were developed across the Tees Valley prior to Christmas, recognising that we were anticipating a really difficult winter period, and obviously that's been compounded by Omicron. So we've had work streams looking at improving or supporting capacity within a primary care setting, ensuring that we've got more timely handover of ambulances when they arrive at emergency departments, supporting effective discharge and maintaining the elective programs. And I think the elective program's been underlined by some of the information that we've shared in the report today. In terms of some of the other programs, Karen Hawkins and colleagues in the community and primary care teams have been working with our practices to look at the use of the Winter Access Fund around primary care. And they've also been taking forward some really positive work around discharge to make sure that we've got appropriate community discharge settings to help support people who no longer need to be in hospital, return home or to an alternative setting so we can keep the hospital free for those who absolutely need to be there. So that's all really supported maintaining the system during the extreme pressures we've experienced. One other area where we've had real pressures has been around the ambulance service. I think the pressure's been well documented. What I can say is that as of this week, we've started to see a reduction in some of those, with the ambulance service de-escalating to REAP level 3. REAP is the measure of pressure that ambulance services are using. So in the acute setting, we use the OPAL framework, ambulance services use the REAP framework, and level 4 is the highest level of pressure being experienced. So it's good to see that I've started to de-escalate. Off the back of that, we're seeing reductions in staff sickness levels, so they've started to come down as well, and improvements in the response standards. But clearly there's a strong link between the ability for ambulances to hand over patients in emergency departments and the ability to get back out on the road and respond to calls. And a key part of that is making sure that we've got good flow in hospitals and timely discharge, so we keep beds open and support new admissions coming into the trust. So all of that works interlinked, but we are making some headway, which is positive. That's probably it in terms of recovery, Pos. The performance report's attached. More than happy to pick up on any questions or queries that any of the governing body members have, and I'll try and respond to those.
Just one quick question, Craig. Yep. You mentioned, I think it was South Tees being in a position to help other areas by the end of the year. Can I just check it's by the end of the financial year, particularly for our sort of lay colleagues?
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, apologies. I was talking financial years there. I should have made that clear. So the ask on the NHS is to reduce and eliminate over 104-week waits by the end of this financial year, so the 31st of March. So hopefully, if we can continue the positive work that's been undertaken at South Tees, they'll have been able to reduce their 104-week waits to zero, and therefore offer some support to other trusts who are still working on delivering that standard.
Really good to hear, because that means that it's only just over 2 months away rather than 10 months away or 11 months away. So,
absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. I've got a hand up from David.
Thanks, Craig. Really a comment, I think, just to really pass on our thanks to the trusts who have done so well catching up and reducing the number of patients who've got these longer waits. A long way to go, but I think always there's so much pressure with all the emergency admissions coming in this winter, COVID included and non-COVID. It's great that this catch-up is being achieved. So just to express appreciation more than anything else.
Thanks, David. I'll make sure that that's passed on. I think all of the FTs have done a fantastic job in making sure that they could keep the elective programs going at all, when at all possible, right through the winter period, and especially while the pandemic's been in its peak. So I'll pass those comments on. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah. Any other comments, queries? I don't see any other hands up. So note the presentation and the report, and noted all the issues that you flagged, Craig, but as David said, we also note the performance in particularly carrying on with the recovery work that has been achieved, and that involves the whole system working together as well to make sure that happens, for particularly issues in relation to patients being able to be discharged following or anything that has happened to them as well. So thank you very much, Craig. And now over to Jean for the quality and safeguarding report.
Thank you very much, Pos. So in time-honoured fashion, this is an exceptional summary. And I've put a summary on the front of the sheet, so I plan to whistle through that on the assumption that all colleagues have read and digested the contents, but as always, very happy to take any questions. I think that's probably more productive than me talking at great length. So starting off with South Tees Hospitals, never events, we're well cited at this governing body about the challenges for the trust in this regard, the work that they've done to date, the impact and effectiveness of that, and obviously the ongoing improvement work still to be completed. Similarly for the lost to follow-up issue, and just to refresh colleagues' memory that it was identified early at South Tees, but obviously, as we've shared, as you would expect to do in a wider system through the quality surveillance groups, other trusts have also looking to do work in this regard. There is further work to be done, and we look forward to receiving assurances from the trust in relation to the progress of that work, the impact and the effectiveness of that. In terms of North Tees, excuse me, we've talked before about the deteriorating patient work. This is an improvement group looking at measures to improve the approach to this. And we're working collaboratively with the trust, and we've gone back to ask for further detail and further assurances on, on that work. Tuve colleagues are well cited once again on this, and we also had the publication in December last year, just before Christmas, of the CQC overarching report. CQC have done substantial work with the Trust in terms of inspection and regulatory actions over the last year, and their final summary report, as I say, was published in December. We've talked at length about the Datex incident backlog and the approach to addressing that in terms of ensuring that nothing is lost in that process, ensuring that the learning is identified and also embedded, and also that they're able to do the themes, tracks and trending around that. And also to link that with the serious incident work. Again, it's not just reporting of incidents, it's actually investigating and learning the lessons to be learned and implementing them. As we know, the Trust is on an improvement journey and has substantial non-trust but NHS support to the Trust around that. And then just to sort of box that off completely, the thematic reviews of the work that's underway in terms of improvement the Trust is doing generally. I'm not planning to talk to a great deal around NIAS because I think Craig has already covered that in great detail and also made that very clear about the pressures on the Trust, but also the whole system response to addressing that, both in terms of the need to, but also the willingness to engage in that. CDDFT, the maternity services pressures, we've talked about this, and they continue to experience those services, those pressures in services. In fairness, this is a pressure that many providers are feeling, both in terms of the impact of the COVID precautions that we're all working under, but also latterly about the impact on sickness absence because of the isolation, etc., in addition to some underlying quality improvement works that they're doing. Again, CDDFT, excuse me, working on have a theme around deteriorating patients as well, and the improvement work arising from that. Legionella, this is an ongoing situation that the Trust has been addressing for a considerable time. The good thing about this, and I don't know if Penny's still with us and wants to come in at all, but the Trust are taking a very wide system collaborative approach around this to make sure that public health colleagues, both from the local authority, but Public Health England, as well as the health and, excuse me, health and safety executive, there's been a recent visit from them. So there's a tremendous amount of energy and expertise going into investigating, implementing, mitigating and remedial measures and understanding the impact and outcome of those. It's not yet resolved, but I think the Trust is to be commended for the very open and transparent approach that they've taken to that. We have discussed previously through Michelle with her other hat on in terms of Health Watch, how this some of these mitigating actions to keep people safe have meant that patient experience has been altered in terms of access, convenient access to shower and facilities, but the priority has always been around optimizing and maintaining people's patients' safety. And then finally, just on excuse me, just on the summary sheet, I've mentioned again the British Pregnancy Advisory Service. You will recall from the November meeting that I provided full details there of the CQC publicly available reports in relation to this service. We've worked collaboratively both with the local services, but also wider NHS colleagues, some of our Northwest colleagues and Doncaster colleagues, around understanding exactly where we are with this provider, where they are in terms of addressing their areas for improvement, their status in that, and any associated assurances. We have now got a varied picture across the wider patch, so we're looking to make sure that that is consistent and supported by evidence. But as always, happy to take any questions, because that is what could only be described as a canter through the report, and there's a lot more detail in there, so happy to pick up any points, Chair.
Okay, thank you for the report, Jean. Any queries or comments? while people are thinking, this is more of a wider question in relation to quality, because evidently since our last meeting and your last report, we've had the Omicron surge, and you've alluded to the pressures on the system as a result of that, and particularly staffing issues. I don't know if you and Andy, as well as chair of the quality committee, just want to sort of touch on the balancing act that we'll be needing to do in relation to monitoring quality of the services that we've commissioned on behalf of the population of Tees Valley, and not actually impacting on the delivery of the services, particularly during this surge. Jean and Andy?
Yeah, well, I'm happy to.
Jean first and then Andy.
Yeah, I'm
Anything
happy.
after?
Yeah, I'm happy to pick up. So the CCGs have been in place since 2013, and since that time, we have, as you would expect and imagine, put an awful lot of time into setting systems up and refining them to make them smooth, and the information flows very clear and transparent. So what we've done in regard of latterly, while trusts are under, and over the duration of the pandemic, as we know, there's been different peaks and troughs in terms of intensity. So we have many contractual information flows that just flow. They've been simplified, the systems. They're simple systems, but they're actually very detailed information. So we look at that routinely as that comes. And what we also do is work very closely with our providers so we understand where they are in terms of improvements, where they are in terms of pressures, where they're not in terms of things that are being altered in delivery or whatever. What we also have is the benefit at the minute of having gone back into that level 4 EPRR status, which is about reducing the burden so that where any provider is able to continue to deliver. This is where...
Sorry, would you just expand on what EPRR is, just for the benefit of folks?
I knew you would say that. It's the emergency preparedness levels and the escalation. So a level 4 means that we are in a centralized command and control. And that comes from the department. So the whole of the NHS is working to that at the minute. So we're around about reducing the burden, reducing any extraneous burden, any not necessarily inconsequential requests, but the additional requests, so that everybody can focus on delivering care at the front line. And that's where our existing flows of information really help, because that continues to happen. We continue to meet with, usually speak with, talk to colleagues to understand, be able to take the pressure, and then they are still similarly very receptive if there's any key issues, because they know that that's what we're working to. We're not picking up anything unless it's a significant concern. So our monitoring and surveillance continues, as well as in many cases as a CCG, we have colleagues who are not just doing their day job in the CCG, but have got additional duties in terms of supporting the system, and in some cases supporting into providers as well. I'm not sure, does that answer your question?
No, that's lovely. Thanks, Jean. Yeah. Okay.
Andy, did you want to say anything else?
You're on mute, Andy. You went off and then back on. That's it.
Thanks, Paz. I think what's really important is that we recognise the level 4 commitment, and we're realistic in what we try to do is when we're monitoring quality. I think we continue to take the information in, and we do look at that and understand it. But we have to try and support the trusts in there trying to survive in level 4. But hopefully those things are settling down now, so we'll be back to our normal dialogue very soon.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Andy. Thanks, Jean. Any other observations or queries or comments from anybody? No. Okay, so thank you very much, Jean.
Thank you.
Note your reports considered and noted, and now we'll move on to Jackie and the governance, assurance and risk report.
Okay, thanks, Paz. The report that you have in front of you just brings out some of the key governance and assurance issues and updates since we last met in November. Since that time, as we've heard a number of times today, obviously the transition to the Integrated Care Board has been delayed, and with with that brings a few governance issues that we're working through, and I've highlighted those in the report in terms of decision making, HR issues, policy extensions, our information governance, data security requirements in terms of toolkits, etc. So those are all being worked through to make sure that we continue to operate in a safe way. In addition to that, the due diligence work for the transition continues, and we're working alongside other CCGs and the Commission and Support Unit to make sure that that process is as proportionate whilst being robust as possible. Obviously, we have got there's an awful lot of areas to cover, and we've got staff working just to make sure that everything is in line, so that when we move over to the ICB, that the new organisation's got the assurances that we're ready to operate safely. In terms of declarations of interest, as a public and clinically led organisation, the CCG continues to be committed to making sure that we're transparent, clinically sound decisions are made and that reflect our local needs and the best interest of patients. A formal requirement of that is some declarations of interest and gifts and hospitality guidelines and statutory guidance, and a detailed paper outlining our approach to that for this year was taken to the Audit and Assurance Committee in December, and there'll be another one going in March that summarises how we've managed any declarations that have been made throughout the year in all of our committees. All staff are required to undertake conflicts of interest mandatory training, and as of yesterday, all of our core staff have completed that. So we are at 100% for our core staff. Similar to other CCGs, of course, and picking up on the burden, reducing the burden guidance and support that we've received centrally, there has been slight relaxation in terms of mandatory training. For us as a CCG, what we have decided to do is to take a risk-based approach to this. So our clinical colleagues in practice, we have taken into account their previous involvement with the CCG, their previous training, recognising that the guidance and the training hasn't changed, and taken very much a risk-based approach to make sure that not only can we continue to operate within the guidance, but that we're not adding an additional layer of burden onto our clinical colleagues at that time. There's an update in the report about equality, diversity and inclusion. And obviously we're continuing with our aim to raise awareness and strengthen our work and practices. But in addition to the more formal actions arising out of things like the people plan and the workforce rate equality standard, there are a couple of things that I've brought out in the report as well. And you'll see with as an appendix to the report, we've produced an infographic which shows what the Tees Valley would look like if it was a village of 1,000 people using the protected characteristics. Members will be familiar with a similar version that we use in terms of health conditions, but we thought it's quite a helpful illustrative way of helping people to understand what our population would look like in that way. We're going to build on this work and see if we've got the data that would allow us to break it down to the local authority boroughs, but also on a broader scale to reflect the ICB population as well. So it just helps us to communicate and see that in a bit more visual, which is obviously helpful for an awful lot of people think more along those lines. Also, in terms of equality and diversity, myself and Caroline Gitcham, the governing body lay member champion for equality and diversity, met with the head of people services at North Star Housing a couple of months ago. We heard about their very impressive and award-winning work that they've been doing as an organisation to improve not only the equality and diversity within their staffing, but also how they link in with their population and their residents. And I'm aiming to use that information to feed into the development of the North East and North Cumbria ICB strategy, as well as take account of it when we're doing local CCG recruitment activities as well. terms of risk, we haven't included the risk register for this update, but we will have a fully updated version for the March meeting. But just at the time of writing, there were no additions or removals from the risk register at that time, and a more detailed update will be bring next time. Finally, last couple of things. The CCG, as many of you will know, we've updated a number of times. We have done an awful lot of work in terms of looking after our staff, and this hasn't just been because of the pandemic and working from home, but the three predecessor CCGs have got a strong legacy of looking after staff, and we really wanted to continue that as a new organisation and continue with the momentum that was already in place. That's culminated in us recently being awarded the Better Health at Work Bronze Award, and that's a North East award that is run by the TUC. So we're very proud of that, and it reflects a lot of work that's gone on across the whole organisation. The report does refer to the office arrangements at the time, and we were still in Plan B. Obviously, we're updating that now for the relaxation of those measures as we've reverted back to Plan A, just to make sure that we can continue a hybrid working approach, which suits the organisation and is also helpful for staff. And those were the only things I particularly wanted to highlight. Pause if anybody has any comments, I'm happy to take them.
Okay, thanks, Jackie. Certainly the infographic is a nice way to display the distribution of things. It's easier to understand, to my mind, with it being based on 1,000 people than a percentage, which then gets into decimal points and you can't, just exactly how does that work? Yeah, so that does show things very nicely. Anybody else, any comments? Certainly in relation to sort of the staff and encouraging staff health awareness and so on. It's been a good fun doing my bit to help the CCG climb Everest in the how many steps you're doing each day. Everybody is pitching into their team and adding in their step counts to sort of hopefully reach Everest by the end of the session, which is I think in another couple of weeks. So yeah, good to do. I see David, you've got your hand up.
It's just really to comment, and it's great that the CCG has been given this Better Health at Work Bronze Award, which reflects the value that is placed on staff. And again, across the whole of the NHS, there's so much pressure at the moment, and I think all our organisations are working in similar ways to make sure that our staff are supported as well as possible. And it's so important both to retain staff, keep them happy while they're working, and to raise the profile of the whole NHS as a great place to work for young people or older people who are considering a career in the NHS. So I think this sort of award and effort is well worthwhile. So it's really good news. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else? No, I don't see any other hands up. So thank you, Jackie. Note the report. And we move on to still yourself again, Jackie, for the people plan progress in the Tees Valley.
Okay, thank you. Governing body had previously received information about the NHS-wide people plan and people promise a number of months ago, together with the detailed action plan. This report provides or offers the governing body with some assurances as to the actions that have been undertaken. The report it goes into quite a lot of detail, and there's a summary there outlining all of the actions and where we see ourselves against them. There are still some areas that we need to continue to work on across an ICB and ICS footprint. In terms of recruitment and promotion practices, for example, which is something that is being piloted elsewhere in the country, and organisations are learning from those. And an area that I'm particularly keen for us to progress as we become a bigger organisation is the introduction of staff networks as well. Obviously, as small CCG organisations, that was a little bit more difficult to do because anything that came out of those would be a bit more identifiable if they were relating to any of the protected characteristics. That being said, however, that there's no reason that we can't try to offer levels of support to our staff, and I've been in touch with some of our foundation trust colleagues to see if we can link into those if possible in the meantime, just so that people have got a safe ear should they need them. But that's something certainly as an ICB we'll be able to move forward. It does feature as well, of course, in the recently published operational planning guidance for 22-23 and the need to invest in our workforce. And so it is something that continues to be, and rightly so, high up on the agenda for the NHS as we try to continue to grow and be a resilient organisation. So again, more than happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you, Jackie. Any comments or questions? No. But one observation that I don't know if we've necessarily expressed before is particularly this bit in relation to flexible working, that we've switched over to very flexible working as evidenced by this meeting where we're not having to meet in person. And certainly from a point of view of impact on the environment and carbon usage, our ways of working are now significantly different and less impactful to my mind than what they were, thinking back to a year, two, certainly 3 or 4 years ago, in that, you know, there would have been a significant number of people doing car journeys to attend meetings, not least being governing body meetings. So that's one thing that helps from a perspective of flexible working. I hope, and Michelle, hopefully we may get some feedback from public members in the fact that by virtue of the fact that we're A, working online, and B, available as a recording as well, that hopefully we're promoting more engagement with the public that we're providing and commissioning services for, rather, due to the hard changes of ways of working. So my reflections on, indirectly, I suppose, on the people plan. So thank you very much, Jackie. That report is noted, and we move on to Janet Walker and update on the COVID-19 vaccination program. Oh, sorry. Sorry, before we move on, Janet, sorry, I hadn't noticed. Hassan's got his hand up.
So I was a bit slow in getting my hand up there. I couldn't find the button. I do apologise. Yeah, just to say that as a clinician, I found it really helpful having some of these meetings remotely and being able to get to some of the meetings, as well as it being good for the environment and reducing car journeys. Just being able to dial in and be a part of them. You know, I can't say what attendance was like before, but I feel at the moment definitely able to make much more of the meeting. So it'd be great to see some sort of hybrid working going forward in these sort of meetings. People that live further away are able to engage as well. So it's definitely been some benefit.
Absolutely, Sam. I absolutely second that. And hopefully that will, by way of maintaining that sort of way of working, it will encourage clinician engagement in the new structures in the future. Certainly that has been one issue that sort of has slightly deterred clinicians from engagement in the the more less direct clinical delivery elements of the NHS, and clinician input is valuable. But also I saw Michelle's hand was up, the thumb was up there for that, and I hope that hopefully will maintain and encourage patient and public involvement in the future ways of working. Okay, so thank you very much. Sorry, Janet, bit of a digression. Back to you.
No worries, thanks, Paz. Just to say that obviously things have moved on at significant pace since we last met in November, and delighted to say that across the Tees Valley we've given over 1.3 million COVID vaccination boosters. Now that's not all since we last met, not surprisingly. That is the continuation of the programme where we're up to at the moment. So that's 83% of first doses have been given across the Tees Valley. The uptake of second doses is 77%, and the uptake of boosters is 77% across the Tees Valley, which is fantastic, and that's great. And people have been coming forward to our PCN sites, community pharmacy, vaccination centres, hospital hubs, pop-up vaccination buses, vans, you name it, school age vaccination service, all sorts of different approaches in all sorts of different venues. However, despite the fact how fantastic that is, unfortunately, we do still have a significant number of individuals resident in the Tees Valley who haven't as yet managed to come forward for their vaccination, be that for their first dose, with over 100,000 that have yet to come forward for the first doses. 37,000 that are due a second dose that we'd love to have a chance to come forward, and 110,000 patients that are currently eligible for a booster dose, and we'd love for them to still be able to come forward. As people will be aware, obviously we had very big vaccine pushes, recognising that with the Omicron variant, the third dose was really significant to reduce the risk of severe disease if you were lucky enough to catch it. And that gave us a very big push with the aim to get every eligible individual vaccinated by the end of December. Now, all our sites put on significant capacity to be able to get all these individuals to come forward and give them the chance to come forward for a vaccination. Unfortunately, capacity that we put on with the number of available appointments, wasn't met by the demand from the public. Now, there are all sorts of reasons for that. Unfortunately, when you've had COVID, you're not eligible for your COVID vaccination for 28 days if you're an adult, or for 12 weeks afterwards if you're a 12 to 15-year-old. So that has meant some of our patients, because of the high numbers of infection that we had, weren't able to come forward. But we have got plans in place, just to make sure I mention this, we've got plans in place to proactively text patients who have tested positive that when they are through their 28-day period, that they'll receive a text to hopefully remind them that they can now become eligible for the dose that they are due, and encourage them to come forward. But obviously that did have a bit of an impact on uptake. And the perception that, well, is the pandemic over now? Well, unfortunately, we know that the pandemic is not over. Omicron is still around, as are the other variants. And yes, you cannot assume it won't impact on yourself. So we are continuing to push forward with all our vaccine approaches, such that anyone who hasn't come forward for their first dose, it's an evergreen offer. That offer will not go off the table. It will not be too late, but come forward as soon as you're able to do so. But recognising that we need to tailor our approaches to those individuals that haven't as yet felt confident to be able to come forward for their vaccine uptake. However, delighted to say that we are doing significantly well with our care home population. We've just completed a return, and we don't know the names of those individuals in care homes yet to be vaccinated, but we are aware of who they are, and we are making sure that PCN sites are covering those really vulnerable patients to make sure that they're covered when they're able to do so. With some of the complications with COVID outbreaks in some care homes, working with our care home staff to try and overcome some vaccine hesitancy, increasing their uptake of COVID vaccination boosters. Over 90% of the housebound patients have now been vaccinated, and we are continuing to work through any barriers with getting those remaining patients able to be in a position to be able to receive their vaccination. One of our particular cohorts of interest is encouraging our pregnant ladies to come forward for vaccination, and uptake is lower, it is true, for all of the first, second and boosters in our patients who are pregnant across the Tees Valley. We're working very closely with midwives in all the local hospitals to make sure that every contact with each individual pregnant lady counts, helping to discuss with them the benefits of the vaccinations. And that includes COVID as well as flu and pertussis. And there's a webinar tonight for health and social care workers who may also be pregnant or work with individuals that are pregnant to make sure that they have the up-to-date information and are able to provide the most informative, myth-busting information to anyone who is pregnant or who has concerns about fertility, encouraging them that yes, it is the right thing to do to come forward for the vaccination. We've had many pop-ups into different communities trying to take the vaccine to people's doorsteps to make it as easy as it possibly can be for them to come forward, recognising that transport should not be a barrier. So many different approaches. We've got cabs for jabs in Hartlepool to help transport people to the vaccine as well. So many different approaches are being tailored, including approaches for the homeless. We do know that our younger individuals have been not coming forward in the same numbers. Maybe the risk hasn't felt as real. There's many different reasons. We've been working with our local authority colleagues in partnership to understand the reasons for vaccine hesitancy, why people haven't as yet come forward for their dosage, and are tailoring our approaches accordingly, and making sure that, yes, you know, the links to holidays or the ability, what you can do if you have got your vaccine passport completed, it's making sure that everyone's aware of the potential benefits for the vaccine, and we're using our behavioural insights work very much to try and tailor and target the approaches. During February, there will be a push for our younger, I mean, I'm far from young, sadly, for our individuals under 30, and there'll be big pushes in colleges, UCA, leisure centres, shopping centres, you know, where we may find it easier to just hit it on the right time for those individuals to think now is the time that they would choose to come forward for their dosage. Next stages of the programme, in January, the programme's been extended to booster doses for vulnerable 12 to 15-year-olds or household contacts of immunosuppressed individuals and 16 to 17-year-olds. The severely immunosuppressed are a cohort of particular concern as well. We have given the third dose to those individuals. 86% of those across the Tees Valley are now covered with plans in place around their treatment intervals, which you've got to get timed right to get the third doses in, and they will be encouraged to be identified for their fourth doses, which they require. The next element of the programme is progressing into vaccination for the vulnerable 5 to 11-year-olds and those who are household contacts of immunosuppressed. They will be identified, well, they have been identified in searches run in your GP practice to know who those individuals are. And there is a supply of paediatric vaccine becoming available that will be delivered into the Tees Valley as from next week. It'll start coming to us, and those practices will be contacting those individuals, making sure that they are aware of how they make their appointment to make sure that they are able to be covered. Following on from the JCVI guidance, recognising that this is the next cohort that we need to be moving into vaccination, alongside continuing all our endeavours with the other cohorts that we've mentioned. I'd like to, if I may, pause, just have a shameless plug also for flu vaccination. The flu vaccination is still available, and certainly, especially from our pregnant ladies' perspective, you know, we need to advise that it's still available. We would encourage people to come forward if they're in the vulnerable group. Our vaccination rates for flu, yes, it's great that we've had really, really good uptake in the over 65s, which is fantastic. But we know that those in at-risk groups, because of other health conditions, and indeed those who are pregnant, you know, have lower rates of uptake. And we would really, really encourage those individuals to come forward. It is not too late. There was flu vaccine available, and would love to give it to you. And some individuals watching this call may be a parent of a 2 or 3 year old child who has just this week received a letter reminding you that your child is eligible for a nasal flu immunisation. That's not an injection, it's up the nose. That is a really, really crucial part of our defence against flu vaccination, and we'd love people to get that booked in at their GP surgery if they receive one of those invite letters. Thanks, Pods. And sorry about the shameless flu plug, sorry.
Don't apologise. This is the opportunity for shameless plugs. And I have to reiterate what I said in my chair's report, which is that thank you very much to everybody who has actually taken up their opportunities to get their initial doses, their second doses, and their booster doses of the COVID vaccine, and equally all those who are taking up their offers of flu vaccine or the flu vaccine for their children, because it really does help people do what they need to do within the society that we live in, is help the others in the society that we're living within, as well as it actually helping to protect ourselves. So thank you to all of these, the people who've taken up their opportunity for vaccination of all various types. Okay, any comments or questions before we move on from Janet's report, which we note and receive? Thank you very much. Very comprehensive report, Janet, particularly all of the particular tweaks and changes and variety and amendments that have been made to try to accommodate as many people to facilitate people getting their vaccine. Thank you very much. Okay, and we also note the amount of work that you yourself have been putting into the COVID vaccine program, Janet, because I know that it's taken up a lot of your time. So thank you very much. Formally noted on behalf of the governing body. Thanks. Right, moving on, there would have been potential verbal update, we always leave this section in for ICB update. I think we've already covered that in the Chief Officer's update and my update anyway, so we'll move on from that. And we've got elements for information. So Janet, anything you want to flag in the value-based commissioning policies?
Not particularly positive, other than to note that these changes have been through the Northern Joint Committee and agreed and are now in place, and it's part of the twice yearly refresh, and we're actually due to start a new refresh that will come into place for the April policy.
Yeah, and this process ensures that there's no effectively postcode variation across the North East. Because it goes to the Joint Committee, it is a unified approach across the whole of the North East. Thank you very much. So moving on to reports from committee chairs. On behalf of Dave, Mark, anything you want to flag from the Executive Committee at all? No.
No, nothing specific. Thanks, Bob.
And Karen on Audit and Assurance Committee? No. And Caroline, Primary Care Commissioning Committee?
No, it's just for information, pause.
Yeah, lovely. Okay. And then we've got sections of minutes for information, executive, primary care and audit again. Just hold your hands up if there's anything to flag. No. And other minutes received, Northern Joint Committee, Stockton Health and Wellbeing, Hartlepool Health and Wellbeing, and South Tees Live Well Board. They're there for information. I haven't been notified of any other business. Anybody else got any other business? No. Okay. Opportunity for questions on the stuff that we've been discussing from members of the public. Nick, anything you want to flag or raise?
No, nothing from me. Thanks. Everything was covered. Thanks again for having us in.
Okay. And the other person whose name I've forgotten, I can't pull the names up quickly enough.
Stuart Arnold.
Yeah. Stuart, anything you want to flag or raise? No. Okay. Right. Okay, doke. Consideration of any impact on the risk register. I think particularly in view of the fact that you haven't had any need to tweak any of the stuff in the risk register, as you mentioned, Jackie, earlier, I can't think of anything here that we've been discussing that is so significantly different that would potentially impact on the risk register. Anybody else? And Jackie, do you want to
just say that the risk register has recently been fully updated? It just wouldn't hit this January governing body, so it will come back in March, and there'll be reference to some of the pressures in terms of BPAS and things like that. So yeah, but there's nothing specific that isn't already on there.
Okay, so thank you very much, everybody. Date and time of next meeting, 23rd of March. It would have been the last meeting of the CCG, but now we've got a 3-month extension. Actually, it lets us have a sort of a longer period of time before we sort of need to formally sign off the fully last arrangements for the ICB. So it'll be sort of preparing for amended business and some of the stuff that we've already raised that we'll be having in the next governing body meeting that we flagged earlier on. Okay, so thank you very much for your time, and I call it a day at 3 minutes to 4, pretty much running to time for once. So hey, right. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for all your helpful and useful contributions to the meeting, and see you all at the next formal governing body meeting in March the 23rd. Cheerio.
Many thanks.